The nights felt heavier than usual, as if silence itself was pressing down on my bedroom walls. I would toss and turn, sweat prickling my skin, until the dream came again. It was always the same. Marcus, my husband, standing under a dim light, smiling in a way that wasn't meant for me. Another woman stood beside him, their fingers laced together like a secret promise. My chest tightened each time, the air refusing to fill my lungs. I jolted awake, my heart racing as if I had been running through a nightmare I couldn't escape. The sheets clung damp against my body, and the clock on the nightstand mocked me with its relentless ticking. I wasn't just startled, I was shaken to the core by something that felt too real. When I finally caught my breath, Marcus would be there, pretending calm. "It's just a dream," he'd say, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. He'd brush off my trembling hands, dismiss the fear in my eyes. But the unease didn't vanish. It lingered, seeping into my mornings, whispering to my heart that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't only a dream after all. Each night, the dream came back sharper, like my mind was trying to etch the betrayal deeper into me. I saw Marcus's hand squeeze hers, his laughter rising like smoke, drifting farther away from me until they both disappeared into the dark. I'd wake with the echo of it still ringing in my ears, my pulse hammering as though I had been left behind in some cruel reality. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I was being silly, that dreams don't mean anything. But my gut told a different story. It wasn't just the dream. It was the way it clung to me long after morning came, filling the air like an unspoken truth. It felt less like imagination and more like a warning I couldn't ignore. Marcus, though, never flinched. He'd shake his head, kiss my forehead, and roll back to sleep as if nothing had disturbed him. His calm only made me more uneasy, as if he knew something I didn't. And I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, asking myself the question that refused to leave me. What if my dream wasn't a dream at all? The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the stronger the dream gripped me. It wasn't random. It repeated with precision, the same laugh, the same touch, the same vanishing into the shadows. It felt like my subconscious was screaming at me, painting a picture I wasn't ready to face. In the daylight, I caught myself studying Marcus differently. The curve of his smile, the way he avoided my eyes when I mentioned the dream, even the slight stiffness in his shoulders. Little things I'd ignored before suddenly stood out, like puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were scattered around me. By the third week, I couldn't pretend anymore. The dream wasn't fading. It was growing bolder, feeding off my doubt. And even though Marcus kept brushing it off, I knew deep down this wasn't just my imagination. Something was waiting for me beneath the surface, and I was about to find out what it was. It started with the small things, the kinds of details you'd miss if you weren't already suspicious. Marcus began coming home later, always with the same excuse about work piling up. At first, I nodded along, telling myself he was just stressed. But my gut twisted tighter every time he walked through the door past midnight, his shirt smelling faintly of something sweet and floral, a perfume I didn't own. I tried to brush it off, telling myself not to spiral, but then I noticed how he always kept his phone face down. It was like he was guarding it, shielding it from my eyes. Every ping, every vibration seemed to send a flicker across his face before he quickly slid it into his pocket. That wasn't the behavior of a man with nothing to hide. The worst part was how familiar it all felt. My dreams had planted the seeds, but real life was watering them now. Every late night, every faint trace of perfume, every secretive glance. It was as if the line between my dreams and reality was blurring. And I couldn't help but wonder if my subconscious had known the truth long before I did. I told myself to stop being paranoid, to stop letting the dreams control me. But the more I tried to silence that voice, the louder it screamed. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at his empty chair, wondering if he was really where he said he'd be. The coffee would go cold in my hands while my mind replayed those images from the night before. Marcus laughing with someone who wasn't me. He made it sound so reasonable whenever I questioned him. Deadlines, he'd sigh, loosening his tie, acting exhausted. But exhaustion doesn't explain perfume. Exhaustion doesn't explain the way he'd shower the second he walked through the door, as if washing something away before I could smell it, before I could see it. I began noticing patterns. The late nights weren't random. They happened on the same days, the same times, as if scheduled. And every time, I'd lie awake long after he fell asleep, my body tense, my dreams replaying the betrayal that felt less like fantasy and more like a memory waiting to surface. By then, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Dreams don't come back night after night without reason, and life doesn't hand you coincidences wrapped in perfume and half-truths. My heart told me what my head tried to deny. Something was wrong, and Marcus's calm dismissals were only making it worse. Each time I closed my eyes, the dream sharpened, like my subconscious was begging me to wake up to reality. His laugh with her grew louder, the way their hands fit together clearer. I'd jolt awake with the echo of it, and lying in the dark, I realized I wasn't just scared of losing him. I was scared of losing myself in the lies. That's when the decision formed inside me, quiet but unshakable. If my dreams refused to let me rest, then I'd find out why. No more brushing it off, no more letting Marcus's excuses soothe me back into doubt. I needed answers, and I was ready to follow the whispers that had haunted me for weeks. The first clue came almost by accident. I was doing laundry when a folded receipt slipped out of his pocket. My heart thudded as I unfolded it. 2 glasses of wine, a dinner for 2, dated on one of his so-called late work nights. I stood frozen in the laundry room, the hum of the dryer filling the silence, and I knew this wasn't paranoia anymore. From then on, I started paying attention. I tracked his routines, his patterns, the way he always left at the same time on Fridays, the way his mood shifted before those nights, lighter, almost excited. I downloaded a simple tracking app, and suddenly, his office location didn't look like an office at all. It was a breadcrumb trail, leading me closer to the truth. I became quieter around him, careful not to let on that I was watching. He thought my silence meant I had let the dream go, but in reality, I was collecting pieces, one by one, like shards of glass that would eventually cut through the lies. And each step brought me closer to the moment I both dreaded and needed. One night, I couldn't resist anymore. I waited until Marcus left, his usual Friday exit wrapped in another excuse about meetings that would run late. My hands trembled as I grabbed my keys, but I told myself this was the only way I'd ever get peace. I kept my headlights low and followed from a distance, every turn tightening the knot in my stomach. He didn't drive toward the office. Instead, he headed across town, to a cozy restaurant glowing warm under strings of lights. My throat went dry as I pulled into a dark corner of the lot, just close enough to see him step out of the car with a spring in his walk I hadn't seen in months. And then she appeared, a woman I'd never laid eyes on, dressed with a softness that clashed painfully with the sharpness inside me. They didn't hesitate, not even for a second. He reached for her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And right there, under that glowing canopy, he leaned in and kissed her. Time stopped in that moment. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest burned, not just with anger, but with the sick realization that my dreams hadn't been warnings. They had been reflections of reality, replaying what my heart already knew. Seeing it with my own eyes was like being struck by lightning. I watched them laugh together, the same laugh that had haunted my sleep. Every detail matched, the tilt of his head, the way his hand lingered on hers, the closeness that once belonged to me. It was as if my subconscious had been whispering the truth all along, and now it screamed in my face. But instead of storming inside, I stayed still. My tears blurred the windshield, but a strange calm washed over me. If I confronted him now, he'd twist it, deny it, make me doubt myself again. No, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. And in that quiet rage, my revenge began to take shape. After that night, I became meticulous. Every chance I got, I documented what I saw. Photos of receipts, screenshots of his location, videos from the restaurant. My phone became a vault of betrayal, each file a brick in the wall I was building against him. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I wanted the truth undeniable, unshakable, impossible to dismiss with a smirk and a lie. Marcus carried on as if nothing had changed, as if his secret life wasn't unraveling behind him. He still kissed my cheek when he left, still mumbled excuses about working late. Little did he know, each word he spoke was another rope tightening around his own neck, and I waited, patient, silent, preparing for the perfect moment. The opportunity came when he decided to host a small dinner at our house. Friends, a few family members, the kind of evening where he loved playing the charming husband. I smiled, set the table, poured the wine, all while the evidence sat waiting in my pocket. He thought he was in control, but the stage was mine. The night began like any other gathering. Laughter floated through the air, glasses clinked, the aroma of roasted herbs filled the room. Marcus thrived in moments like this, holding court, flashing his easy smile, convincing everyone he was the devoted husband and gracious host. I played my part too, moving between guests with practiced warmth, hiding the storm churning inside me. But beneath the small talk and the clinking of silverware, I felt my pulse quicken. I knew what was about to happen, and the anticipation was electric. My phone rested in my hand under the table, already connected to the television. One tap was all it would take to strip away his mask. I kept glancing at Marcus, studying his confidence, savoring the irony. When the moment arrived, glasses raised, a toast hanging in the air, I tapped the screen. The room stilled. Instead of cheerful music, the television lit up with the grainy glow of my video. Marcus at the restaurant, leaning across the table, kissing her like I didn't exist. Gasps filled the space, forks froze midair, and Marcus's face drained of color. For a long second, no one breathed. Marcus stuttered, his words tripping over themselves as he scrambled for an excuse. There's an explanation, but his voice cracked under the weight of the silence pressing in from every corner of the room. His charm, his carefully curated image, collapsed in front of his friends and family. I stood, calm as if I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I raised my glass, my hand steady, my voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Funny," I said, letting the quiet stretch. "I saw this in my dreams before I ever saw it in real life." The words echoed, heavier than the clink of any toast. Then I reached into my bag and placed the divorce papers neatly on the table in front of him. His face crumbled, and whispers rippled through the room like fire catching dry grass. I didn't flinch. For the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, steady breath fill my lungs. This wasn't just revenge, it was freedom. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, as if the chaos had finally released me. Marcus tried to call, tried to explain, but his words no longer carried weight. The scandal spread faster than I expected. Friends stopped answering him. Family looked at him differently, and the woman he had clung to so desperately vanished the moment the spotlight turned harsh. I moved through the house like it was mine again, not a stage for his lies. I packed his things carefully, each box sealing away a chapter I no longer wanted to reread. Signing the divorce papers wasn't painful, it was liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't living in his shadow. I was stepping back into my own light. Nights were the biggest change. I went to bed without dread, without bracing myself for the dream that had haunted me for so long. The silence was different now, peaceful, almost tender. And when I closed my eyes, I didn't see betrayal waiting in the dark. I saw something else, the outline of freedom taking shape. Morning light became my companion again. I'd wake to the golden glow spilling through the curtains, stretch beneath the sheets, and smile without forcing it. The heaviness on my chest was gone, replaced by a calm I hadn't realized I was craving. Even making coffee felt different. The simple act of pouring it into my favorite mug became a ritual of reclaiming myself. There were moments of sadness, of course. Memories don't vanish overnight. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering the man I thought Marcus was, and a pang would hit me. But instead of breaking me, those moments reminded me how strong I had been to face the truth. They weren't chains anymore. They were lessons carved into my skin. Friends called to check in, some offering pity, others admiration. I didn't need either. What I needed was exactly what I had, the quiet assurance that I had chosen myself. That choice became my anchor. And every day, the echo of my old nightmare faded a little more, replaced by the sound of my own laughter filling the house. One morning, I pulled the curtains wide open and let the sun flood the room. The warmth kissed my face, and for the first time in months, I felt completely alive. No shadows lurking, no dreams waiting to strangle me in the night, just the bright promise of a new beginning. My reflection in the glass didn't look broken anymore. It looked whole. That night, I slept soundly. No tossing, no jolting awake with a racing heart. My dreams were quiet, gentle even, filled with images of open skies and laughter I could finally call my own. The kind of rest that comes only when you stop fighting against the truth and start walking with it. As I woke the next morning, sunlight brushing over my skin, I whispered the words that had been waiting to be said. My nightmare ended the moment I stopped ignoring my instinct. And with that, I knew. I wasn't haunted anymore. I was free.
Playing with dirt again? My sister laughed as I loaded seedlings into my car. Dad says you've thrown away your MBA to become a glorified gardener. Little did they know those seedlings would sprout into a $30 million business that would revolutionize urban agriculture. Sometimes the smallest seeds yield the most surprising harvests. The derision in my sister Valerie's voice was nothing new. Since quitting my management consulting job 3 years ago, my family had made their disapproval abundantly clear. Their golden child had gone rogue, trading PowerPoint presentations and corporate lunches for soil samples and growth charts. It's not just gardening, I said, carefully arranging the last tray of microgreen seedlings. And yes, I'm still playing with dirt, as you call it. Valerie leaned against my 10-year-old Honda, arms crossed over her designer blouse. At 35, she embodied everything our achievement-obsessed family valued. Senior vice president at a multinational bank, tasteful penthouse in the financial district, vacations that make perfect Instagram portfolios. Mom's worried about you, Jack. We all are. You're 33, living in that tiny apartment, driving this ancient car, and what? Growing lettuce on rooftops? This isn't what Dad paid Stanford tuition for. I closed the trunk, suppressing the familiar mixture of frustration and self-doubt her words triggered. Tell Mom I'm fine. The business is growing. We just signed 2 more buildings. Buildings that let you grow plants on their roofs, she said, clearly unimpressed. Very prestigious. My phone buzzed with a text from Amara, my business partner. Meeting with investors moved up. How soon can you get here? I have to go, I told Valerie. Investor meeting. She raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. People are actually investing in this scheme. I didn't bother responding. After 3 years of similar conversations, I learned that no explanation would suffice. My family had decided my urban agriculture startup was a hobby, a phase I was going through before inevitably returning to the corporate fold. As I drove across town to our office, a converted warehouse in a rapidly evolving industrial district, I thought about how it had all started. not with some grand vision of disrupting agriculture, but with a simple rooftop garden on my apartment building. Stressed from 70-hour work weeks and soul-crushing projects, I started growing vegetables as therapy, something tangible, living that responded to care in ways spreadsheets never did. My neighbors noticed, asked for advice on starting their own gardens. Building management saw the potential for green marketing and offered me more space. Then came the realization that changed everything. Urban buildings were vast, untapped growing spaces with built-in markets directly below them. Why ship produce thousands of miles when you could grow it right where people lived and worked? I'd met Amara at an urban sustainability conference where I'd gone seeking advice on irrigation systems. With her background in environmental engineering and my business experience, something clicked. 6 months later, I quit my job and Urban Harvest was born. Now we manage 27 productive gardens across the city, from hotel rooftops to corporate headquarters to hospital grounds. We developed a proprietary system that made urban agriculture not just environmentally sound but economically viable, the holy grail that had eluded so many before us. But my family still thought I was playing in the dirt. "There you are," Amara said as I hurried into our conference room, where she sat with our financial director, Pablo. "The Greenfield partners are already on their way." "Sorry, family delay," I explained, setting up my laptop. "What's the change?" "They're bringing their full investment committee," Pablo said, excitement evident in his voice. "I think they're ready to commit." I felt a rush of adrenaline. Greenfield Ventures wasn't just any investment firm. They were the premier funders in sustainable technology. Their support would mean not just capital but validation of everything we've been building. "How are the presentation slides?" I asked, pulling up our deck. "Perfect," Amara assured me. At 38, she brought a steady confidence to our partnership that balanced my occasional doubts. I updated the growth projections based on the Sanders Building data. "We're outperforming our estimates by 22%. I nodded, scanning the room to ensure everything was perfect. Our conference room told our story visually: living walls of herbs and vegetables, digital displays showing real-time data from our sites across the city, architectural models of our next-generation growing systems. My phone buzzed again. My father. "Valerie says you're still pursuing this garden project. Let's talk about getting you back into proper business." I silenced my phone as voices approached down the hallway. "Just remember," Amara whispered, "we're not just selling produce. We're selling a revolution in urban food systems." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of presentations, questions, and discussion. The Greenfield team was thorough, probing every aspect of our business model, technology, and growth strategy. But I could see the growing interest in their eyes as we walked them through the numbers. The productivity per square foot, the elimination of transportation costs, the premium customers willingly paid for hyper-local produce. "What you've built here is remarkable," said Catherine Weiss, Greenfield's managing partner, as we concluded. "Your execution is far ahead of anyone else in this space." "The question," added her colleague, "is scale. Can you replicate this success in other cities?" "That's exactly why we're seeking this investment," I explained. "We've proven the model here. Now we're ready to expand to Chicago, Boston, and Austin in the next 18 months. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "We'd like to move forward with due diligence. Our team will be in touch tomorrow to schedule the next steps." After they left, the three of us stood in momentary stunned silence before erupting into cheers. "This is it," Pablo said, grinning widely. $7 million in funding. "Do you know what this means?" "It means we were right," Amara said simply, squeezing my arm. "All those people who said urban agriculture couldn't be profitable at scale, we proved them wrong." Including my family, I thought but didn't say. "Let's not celebrate too early," I cautioned. "Due diligence can uncover issues we haven't anticipated." "Always the careful one," Amara teased. "But today, let's enjoy this moment. Dinner tonight? I'm calling the whole team." As they began making plans, I stepped out to the balcony that overlooked our demonstration garden, a lush oasis of productivity in the midst of concrete and steel. Neat rows of vegetables, herbs, and edible flowers grew in our patented modular system, designed to maximize yield while minimizing water and energy use. I thought about how far we'd come from my first haphazard rooftop garden. The innovations we developed out of necessity: water reclamation systems, lightweight growing mediums, iode monitoring tools had become our competitive advantage. the intellectual property that investors now valued in the millions. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Darling, your father is concerned. Richard's firm has an opening in their strategy department. Excellent salary and benefits. Shall I put in a word?" I sighed, pocketing the phone without responding. Even now, with 27 sites, 40 employees, and major investors knocking on our door, they couldn't see what we were building. 2 weeks later, the investment was confirmed. $7 million to expand Urban Harvest across the country. The press release went out on a Tuesday morning, picked up immediately by several business publications and sustainability blogs. By afternoon, my phone was flooded with congratulatory messages from friends, former colleagues, industry contacts, and a terse text from my father. $7 million. Call me. I waited until evening, after reviewing contracts with our lawyers and planning sessions with the team. When I finally called, he answered on the first ring. $7 million, he said without preamble. For growing vegetables on rooftops. For transforming urban food systems, I corrected. For building technology that makes cities more sustainable and resilient. A pause. The Wall Street Journal mentioned your company. Of course that would be what impressed him. Not the environmental impact, not the communities we were feeding, but recognition from a publication he respected. They did, I confirmed. They're running a feature next week on innovation in food systems. Another pause. Your mother and I would like to see this operation of yours. Perhaps dinner afterward. It wasn't an apology for 3 years of dismissal. It wasn't even an acknowledgement that he might have been wrong. But coming from my father, it was significant. "I'd like that," I said carefully. "How about Thursday? I can give you a tour of our main site and the office." "Thursday works. 4 o'clock? 4 is perfect." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, looking out at the city lights. In the 3 years since starting Urban Harvest, I'd invited my parents to see our work countless times. They'd always declined, too busy or not interested enough to make the effort. Now, with the validation of serious investment and media coverage, they were suddenly available. Part of me felt bitter about this, that external validation meant more to them than my passion or hard work. But another part understood. They'd grown up in different times, with different measures of success. Risk-taking wasn't valued in their world. Stability and prestige were the currencies that mattered. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally ready to understand what I was building. Thursday arrived, bringing unexpected nerves. I pitched to skeptical investors, negotiated with demanding corporate clients, and managed crises from pest outbreaks to system failures. But explaining my vision to my parents somehow felt more daunting. The great Jack Chen, nervous about a simple tour. Amara teased, finding me adjusting the displays in our visitor center for the 3rd time. "They're my parents," I said, as if that explained everything. She squeezed my shoulder. "They're going to be impressed, Jack. What you've built here is extraordinary. Even the most stubborn people can't deny what they see with their own eyes." "You don't know my father," I muttered, but I appreciated her encouragement. At precisely 4 o'clock, my parents arrived. My father in his customary business suit, my mother elegant in understated designer wear. It looked out of place among our industrial chic surroundings, like visiting dignitaries in a foreign country. "This is interesting," my mother said, her eyes roaming over the living walls that bordered our reception area. "It's all edible," I explained, gesturing to the herbs and leafy greens. "We harvest from these walls 3 times a week for local restaurants." "In the office?" my father asked, clearly skeptical. "It's a demonstration of our systems," I said. "Follow me and you'll see how it works at scale." I led them through the building, explaining our operations. The seedling nursery where we started thousands of plants each week. The research lab where we tested new varieties and growing methods. The monitoring station where technicians tracked data from all our sites across the city. My father asked unexpected technical questions about yield rates and water usage. My mother seemed most interested in the social impact, our partnerships with schools and community centers, the food justice programs we'd initiated in underserved neighborhoods. Finally, we reached the rooftop of our building, our first full-scale commercial site and still our most productive. 1/2 an acre of vegetables, herbs, and edible flowers grew in neat rows, with staff members harvesting for afternoon deliveries to restaurants and markets across the city. "All this grows here, year-round?" My mother sounded genuinely astonished. "Year-round," I confirmed. "Our systems are climate-controlled." We use 95% less water than conventional farming, no pesticides, and our carbon footprint for distribution is minimal because we're right here in the city. My father walked slowly along the rows, examining the irrigation system, the structural elements, the monitoring devices attached to each growing bed. I was explaining our proprietary soil mixture to my mother when he rejoined us. "This is no hobby," he said, and I detected something new in his voice. "This is engineering, architecture, logistics. You've built a vertical supply chain." "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what we've done." He nodded, looking out over the garden, then to the city skyline beyond. "And you own the intellectual property? The systems, the technology?" "All patented or patent pending," I confirmed. "That's a large part of what the investors are funding, scaling our technology to other cities." Another nod. "Smart. Very smart." It wasn't exactly an apology for 3 years of dismissal. It wasn't even direct praise. But coming from my father, it felt momentous. Dinner that evening had a different tone from our usual family gatherings. Gone were the subtle digs about my career choices, the suggestions for real jobs, the comparisons to Valerie's corporate achievements. Instead, my parents asked genuine questions about the business, about our expansion plans, about the challenges of scaling to other cities. "I didn't understand before," my father said as we waited for dessert. "I thought you were just gardening." I nabbed Dad. "But this is legitimate innovation. Disruptive technology. You're not just growing vegetables, you're reimagining urban infrastructure." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "We're proud of you, Jack. You saw something we couldn't see." The validation felt good. Better than I wanted to admit. But as I drove home that night, I realized something important. Their approval, while welcome, wasn't necessary anymore. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped measuring my success against their expectations. 1 year after the Greenfield investment, Urban Harvest had expanded to 4 additional cities, with 30 new growing sites and over 100 employees. We'd been featured in major business publications, sustainability conferences, and even a documentary about the future of food. My family had become enthusiastic supporters, with my father often sending me articles about urban agriculture or introducing me to potential business connections. My sister had even invested personally in our Series B funding round, a gesture that meant more to me than the money itself. "Quite a change from playing with dirt," Amara observed one evening as we reviewed plans for our newest site in Austin. I laughed. Sometimes people need to see success to believe in the vision. And sometimes, she added thoughtfully, the best validation comes from proving the skeptics wrong. She was right. The journey from rooftop garden to multi-city agricultural enterprise had been filled with doubters, not just my family, but potential clients, investors, even other urban farming ventures who said our model wouldn't scale. But with each harvest, each new site, each technological improvement, we'd proven that urban agriculture could be more than a feel-good sustainability project. It could be a viable business, a transformative force in urban food systems. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Just saw your interview in Business Week. Impressive. Dinner Sunday to discuss the new expansion." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Sometimes success speaks a language everyone understands. But the real victory wasn't winning my family's approval. It was building something meaningful despite their doubt. The garden had indeed grown into an empire. One carefully tended seedling at a time. "Your signature is on the printout, Meredith. My lawyer says I get to keep everything." James tossed the document across the mahogany table with a smirk. Little did he know I'd spent the last 6 months meticulously documenting his financial fraud, and the FBI agent sitting in my car outside was about to make our divorce negotiations far more interesting than he had planned. 3 years earlier, I'd been Meredith Chen, rising star at Morgan Stanley with an MBA from Wharton and a corner office with a view of Manhattan. Now I was Meredith Reynolds, trophy wife to tech CEO James Reynolds, relegated to planning dinner parties and looking presentable at corporate functions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through a series of small compromises that eventually erased the ambitious woman I once was. We met at an investment conference where I was representing my firm. James approached after my presentation, all charm and intelligent questions. At 42, he was 12 years my senior, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had built something substantial. His company, Nexus Technologies, was making waves in enterprise software, and our conversation about valuation models and market penetration strategy extended into dinner. Most women's eyes glaze over when I talk about scalable infrastructure, he said, refilling my wine glass. You not only understand it, you've challenged 3 of my assumptions. I find that incredibly attractive. I was flattered, of course, and impressed by his apparent respect for my professional acumen. His courtship was deliberate and thoughtful. Tickets to the symphony, discussions about books we both enjoyed, cooking classes where we laughed over our mutual incompetence with pastry dough. When he proposed 8 months later, I accepted without hesitation. The warning signs emerged slowly after the wedding. James suggested I scale back my hours at work when his business trips became more frequent. I need you at the Henderson dinner on Thursday, he'd say. They're potential investors. Can't you delegate that project to someone else? Each time I acquiesced, something small died inside me. When I finally expressed my frustration, his response was both gentle and undermining. Darling, you don't need to prove yourself anymore. My company's valuation hit $800 million last quarter. We're set for life. Why stress yourself for a paycheck you don't need? 6 months later, I resigned from my position. James was delighted. Now you can focus on what really matters, he said, without specifying what that might be. What followed was my slow disappearance. I became a corporate wife, arranging our social calendar, overseeing renovations of our Connecticut home, and standing beside James at events, smiling and making appropriate conversation with the spouses of other executives, while the important people discussed business matters. I suggested starting a family, thinking children might fill the growing emptiness, but James was dismissive. Not yet. The company's at a crucial growth stage. I need to focus. The first concrete evidence of his infidelity came in the form of a hotel receipt accidentally left in his suit pocket. The Four Seasons, a Thursday night when he claimed to be in Chicago. The room service order included 2 breakfast entrees. When confronted, he didn't bother denying it. It's just physical, Meredith. It doesn't mean anything. You've been so distant lately. Somehow, I had become the problem. My distance had driven him to seek comfort elsewhere. I swallowed my pride and suggested marriage counseling. He agreed, attended 2 sessions, then began finding excuses to miss appointments. The real breaking point came when I discovered that James had opened accounts in my name and used them for questionable transactions. I found the evidence while organizing tax documents, statements from banks I'd never heard of, with withdrawals and deposits that made no sense for our household. When I questioned him, his demeanor changed completely. You shouldn't be digging through financial matters you don't understand, he snapped. Just stick to planning the Christmas party. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling and finally seeing my marriage clearly for what it was, a gilded cage. The next morning, I began my careful exit strategy. First, I consulted a divorce attorney, discreetly paying in cash for my personal savings that James knew nothing about. Then I started gathering evidence, not just of his affairs, which were merely symptoms, but of the financial irregularities that appeared increasingly suspicious the more I investigated. I leveraged old contacts from my banking days, friends who were happy to provide guidance without asking too many questions. What emerged was a pattern of activity that suggested James was using shell companies to hide assets and potentially engaging in securities fraud related to his position at Nexus. For 6 months, I played the dutiful wife while building my case. I restored my professional connections, quietly laid groundwork for financial independence, and meticulously documented everything. Then I contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission through their whistleblower program. The day I told James I wanted a divorce, he laughed. Actually laughed. On what grounds? He asked, amused at my apparent naivety. Irreconcilable differences would be the kindest option. I replied evenly. His amusement faded to irritation. You've signed a prenuptial agreement, Meredith. You'll get the settlement outlined there and nothing more. Don't make this unpleasant. 2 weeks later, we sat in our attorney's conference room for preliminary discussions. James was accompanied by Martin Schiff, his longtime legal counsel and friend. I brought Diane Keating, a partner at a top divorce firm known for representing women in high net worth cases. Before we begin, James said, sliding the prenuptial agreement across the table, let's establish what we're talking about here. According to paragraph 12, in the event of a divorce initiated by either party before the 10-year mark, Meredith receives a one-time payment of $2 million. No alimony, no property division. Diane took the document, reviewed it briefly, then placed it in her folder without comment. My client is prepared to be reasonable, she said calmly. However, there are some matters that may affect the validity of this agreement. James and Martin exchanged confident glances. The prenup is ironclad, Martin insisted. Drafted by me personally, properly executed, fully disclosed financials. There are no grounds for contestation. Perhaps, Diane continued, unfazed. But there is the matter of the fraudulent financial disclosures. James stiffened slightly but maintained his composure. I disclosed everything required by law at the time of execution. Any subsequent changes in my financial status are irrelevant to the agreement's validity. I'm not referring to omissions, I interjected, speaking directly to James. I'm referring to the shell companies you created to hide assets, the accounts you opened in my name without my knowledge, the misrepresentations to Nexus investors about company performance. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I nodded to Diane, who removed a thick file from her briefcase and placed it on the table. We have documentation of at least $18 million in hidden assets, plus evidence of multiple securities violations. Special Agent Thomas from the FBI is very interested in discussing these matters with you. This is absurd, Martin sputtered. You're making baseless accusations to try to leverage a better settlement. If they're baseless, I replied, then you have nothing to worry about. But the SEC disagrees, and they've opened a formal investigation based on the evidence I provided through their whistleblower program. James stared at me, his expression shifting from shock to fury. You wouldn't dare. You'll go down with me if there's any truth to this. No, I won't, I said calmly. I've been granted immunity in exchange for my cooperation, and the agents have already subpoenaed your personal and business records. The room fell silent. Martin whispered urgently to James, who seemed suddenly diminished, his confident posture collapsing into something closer to panic. What do you want? He finally asked. A fair settlement, I responded. 50% of all marital assets, the legitimate ones, and sole ownership of the Connecticut house. No alimony, clean break. And if I refuse, then we proceed to discovery, where your financial dealings will be thoroughly examined by the court. Simultaneously, the federal investigation will move forward. Your investors will likely learn of the SEC's interest in Nexus, which I imagine would affect the company's valuation rather dramatically. Martin pulled James aside for a hushed consultation. When they returned to the table, James was visibly shaken. We'll need time to prepare a counteroffer, Martin announced stiffly. Take all the time you need, Diane smiled. But be aware that the FBI has already scheduled an interview with Mr. Reynolds for Thursday morning. It might be advantageous to resolve our matters before that meeting takes place. As we gathered our materials to leave, James grabbed my arm. Why are you doing this? Was I really such a terrible husband? I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man I thought I had married. You didn't consider me a partner, James. You wanted an accessory, not a wife. And when you involved me in your fraud by using my identity, you crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I gave you everything, he hissed. No, I corrected him. You took everything from me, my career, my independence, my self-respect. I'm simply taking it back. The settlement was finalized in record time. James transferred assets worth $22 million to me, far more than the prenup's $2 million provision, and signed over the Connecticut property without argument. In exchange, I agreed not to voluntarily provide additional information to investigators beyond what I had already submitted. It wasn't a clean victory. The SEC investigation proceeded regardless, and 6 months later, James was indicted on multiple charges of securities fraud and financial misrepresentation. Nexus Technologies' stock plummeted, and James was forced to resign as CEO. The man who had once commanded rooms with his presence now appeared haggard and diminished in courthouse photographs. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that I had escaped and regret for the years I had surrendered my identity to become someone's idea of a perfect wife. I sold the Connecticut house and moved back to Manhattan, renting a modest apartment in Chelsea while I plotted my next steps. With financial security came the luxury of time to rediscover who I was beyond my relationship with James. When I was ready, I accepted a position with a boutique investment firm focused on funding women-led startups. The salary was half what I'd earned at Morgan Stanley, but the work was meaningful, and I discovered I had valuable perspective to offer entrepreneurs navigating the complexities of business growth while maintaining their core values. 3 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter. James had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison but was serving his time at a minimum security facility. His letter was neither an apology nor an accusation, simply a reflection on how thoroughly he had lost his way in pursuit of wealth and status. I convinced myself that rules were for ordinary people, he wrote, that my intelligence entitled me to take shortcuts others couldn't see. I didn't value what really mattered until it was gone. I didn't respond. Some chapters are better left closed. Last month, my firm backed a promising medical technology company founded by a brilliant neuroscientist who left academia to commercialize her research. During our first meeting, she confessed her fears about losing her scientific integrity in the business world. "How do I build something successful without compromising who I am?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. Success isn't just about the valuation of your company. It's about staying true to your values while creating something meaningful. The moment you compromise your core principles for expedience or appearance, you've already failed, regardless of what the balance sheet says. She nodded slowly. You sound like you've learned that lesson personally. The hard way, I acknowledged. But it was worth every painful step. As I left her lab that evening, I felt the weight of my wedding ring, which I still wore on my right hand as a reminder, differently than before. It no longer represented loss or betrayal, but a hard-won wisdom I couldn't have gained any other way. Sometimes the most valuable lessons cost everything we thought we wanted, only to give us what we truly need. My golden parachute wasn't the financial settlement, substantial though it was. It was the reclamation of myself, the woman who had temporarily disappeared into someone else's expectation, but who had found her way back, stronger and more certain than before.